Welcome back, and in this video we're going to interact with instance store volumes. Now this part of the demo does come at a cost. This isn't inside the free tier because we're going to be launching some instances which are fairly large and are not included in the free tier. The demo has a cost of approximately 13 cents per hour, and so you should only do this part of the demo if you're willing to accept that cost. If you don't want to accept those costs, then you can go ahead and watch me perform these within my test environment. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and click on instances, and we're going to launch an instance manually. So I'm going to click on launch instances. We're going to name the instance instance store test, so put that in the name box. Then scroll down and click on Amazon Linux and make sure the AMI is set to Amazon Linux 2 AMI HVM SSD volume type, and the architecture needs to be 64-bit x86. Scroll down and then in the instance type box click, and we need to find a different type of instance. This is going to be one that supports instance store volumes. So scroll down and we're looking for M5DN.large. This is a type of instance which includes one instance store volume. So select that. Then scroll down a little bit more, and under key pair, click in the box and select Proceed without a key pair not recommended. Scroll down again, and under Network Settings, click on Edit. Click in the VPC drop-down and select A4L-VPC1. Under Subnet, make sure SN-Web-A is selected. Make sure Enabled is selected for both of the auto-assign public IP drop-downs. Then we're going to select an existing security group, click the drop-down, select the EBS Demo Instance Security Group. It will have some random after it, but that's okay. Then scroll down, and under Storage, we're going to leave all of the defaults. What you are able to do, though, is to click on Show Details next to Instance Store Volumes. And this will show you the instance store volumes which are included with this instance. And you can see that we have one instance store volume, it's 75 GB in size, and it has a slightly different device name. So dev NVMe 0N1. Now all of that looks good, so we're just going to go ahead and click on Launch Instance. And then click on View All Instances. And initially it will be in a pending state, and eventually it will move into a running state, and then we should probably wait for the status check column to change from initializing to 2 out of 2. So go ahead and pause the video and wait for this status check to change to be fully green. It should show 2 out of 2 status checks. So that's now in a running state with 2 out of 2 checks, so we can go ahead and connect to this instance. Before we do though, just go ahead and select the instance and just note the instance's public IP version 4 address. Now this address is really useful because it will change if the EC2 instance moves between EC2 hosts, and so it's a really easy way that we can verify whether this instance has moved between EC2 hosts. So just go ahead and note down the IP address of the instance that you have if you're performing this in your own environment. We're going to go ahead and connect to this instance though, so right click, select Connect, we'll be choosing Instance Connect, go ahead and connect to the instance. Now many of these commands that we'll be using should by now be familiar. Just refer back to the lessons command document if you're unsure, because we'll be using all of the same commands. First we need to list all of the block devices which are attached to this instance, and we can do that with lsblk. This time it looks a little bit different because we're using instance store rather than EBS additional volumes. So in this particular case I want you to look for the 8G volume. So this is the root volume. This represents the boot or root volume of the instance. Remember that this particular instance type came with a 75 GB instance store volume, so we can easily identify it's this one. Now to check that, we can verify whether there's a file system on this instance store volume. If we run this command, so the same command we've used previously, so sudo file -s and then the ID of this volume, so dev NVMe1N1, you'll see it reports data. And if you recall from the previous parts of this demo series, this indicates that there isn't a file system on this volume. We're going to create one, and to do that we use this command. Again, it's the same command that we've used previously, just with the new volume ID. So press enter to create a file system on this raw block device, this instant store volume. And then we can run this command again to verify that it now has a file system. To mount it, we can follow the same process that we did in the earlier stages of this demo series. We'll need to create a directory for this volume to be mounted into. This time we'll call it /instance store. So create that folder, and then we're going to mount this device into that folder. So sudo mount, then the device ID, and then the mount point, or the folder that we've previously created. So press enter, and that means that this block device, this instant store volume, is now mounted into this folder. And if we run a df space -k and press enter, you can see that it's now mounted. Now we're going to move into that folder by typing cd space /instance store. And to keep things efficient, we're going to create a file called instancestore.txt. And rather than using an editor, we'll just use sudo touch and then the name of the file. And this will create an empty file. If we do an ls space -la and press enter, you can see that that file exists. So now that we have this file stored on a file system which is running on this instant store volume, let's go ahead and reboot this instance. Now we need to be careful. We're not going to stop and start the instance. We're going to restart the instance. Restarting is different than stop and start. So to do that, we're going to close this tab, move back to the EC2 console, so click on Instances, right-click on Instance Store Test and select Reboot Instance, and then confirm that. Note what this IP address is before you initiate the reboot operation, and then just give this a few minutes to reboot. Then right-click and select Connect. Using Instance Connect, go ahead and connect back to the instance. And again, if it appears to hang at this point, then you can just wait for a few moments and then connect again. But in this case, I've left it long enough and I'm connected back into the instance. Now once I'm back in the instance, if I run a df space -k and press enter, note how that file system is not mounted after the reboot. Now that's fine because we didn't configure the Linux operating system to mount this file system when the instance is restarted. But what we can do is do an ls-blk again to list the block device. We can see that it's still there, and we can manually mount it back in the same folder as it was before the reboot. To do that, we run this command. So it's mounting the same volume ID, the same device ID, into this same folder. So go ahead and run that command and press enter. Then if we use cd space / and then instance store, press enter, and then do an ls space -la, we can see that this file is still there. Now the file is still there because instant store volumes do persist through the restart of an EC2 instance. Restarting an EC2 instance does not move the instance from one EC2 host to another, and because instant store volumes are directly attached to an EC2 host, this means that the volume is still there after the machine has restarted. Now we're going to do something different though. Close this tab down, move back to Instances. Again, pay special attention to this IP address. Now we're going to right-click and stop the instance. So go ahead and do that and confirm it if you're doing this in your own environment. Watch this public IP v4 address really carefully. We'll need to wait for the instance to move into a stopped state, which it has, and if we select the instance, note how the public IP version 4 address has been unallocated. So this instance is now not running on an EC2 host. Let's right-click, go to Start Instance and start it up again. We'll need to give that a few moments again. It'll move into a running state, but notice how the public IP version 4 address has changed. This is a good indication that the instance has moved from one EC2 host to another. So let's give this instance a few moments to start up, and once it has, right-click, select Connect, and then go ahead and connect to the instance using Instance Connect. Once connected, go ahead and run an ls blk and press enter, and you'll see it appears to have the same instance store volume attached to this instance. It's using the same ID and it's the same size. But let's go ahead and verify the contents of this device using this command. So sudo file space -s space and then the device ID of the instance store volume. If I press enter, now note how it shows data. So even though we created a file system in the previous step, after we've stopped and started the instance, it appears this instance store volume has no data. Now the reason for that is when you restart an EC2 instance, it restarts on the same EC2 host. But when you stop and start an EC2 instance, which is a distinctly different operation, the EC2 instance moves from one EC2 host to another. And that means that it has access to completely different instance store volumes than it did on that previous host. It means that all of the data, so the file system and the test file that we created on the instance store volume before we stopped and started this instance, all of that is lost. When you stop and start an EC2 instance, or for any other reason, which means the instance moves from one host to another, all of the data is lost. So instance store volumes are ephemeral, they're not persistent, and you can't rely on them to keep your data safe. And it's really important that you understand that distinction. If you're doing the developer or sysops streams, it's also important that you understand the difference between an instance restart, which keeps the same EC2 host, and a stop and start, which moves an instance from one host to another. The former means you're likely to keep your data, but the latter means you're guaranteed to lose your data when using instance store volumes. EBS, on the other hand, as we've seen, is persistent, and any data persists through the lifecycle of an EC2 instance. Now, with that being said though, that's everything that I wanted to demonstrate within this series of demo lessons. So let's go ahead and tidy up the infrastructure. Close down this tab, click on Instances. If you followed this last part of the demo in your own environment, go ahead and right click on the instance store test instance and terminate that instance. That will delete it along with any associated resources. We'll need to wait for this instance to move into the terminated state, so give that a few moments. Once that's terminated, go ahead and click on Services and then move back to the CloudFormation console. You'll see the stack that you created using the one-click deploy at the start of this lesson. Go ahead and select that stack, click on Delete, and then Delete Stack. And that's going to put the account back in the same state as it was at the start of this lesson, so it will remove all of the resources that have been created. And at that point, that's the end of this demo series. So what did you learn? You learned that EBS volumes are created within one specific availability zone. EBS volumes can be mounted to instances in that availability zone only and can be moved between instances while retaining their data. You can create a snapshot from an EBS volume which is stored in S3, and that data is replicated within the region, and then you can use snapshots to create volumes in different availability zones. I told you how snapshots can be copied to other AWS regions, either as part of data migration or disaster recovery, and you learned that EBS is persistent. You've also seen in this part of the demo series that instance store volumes can be used. They are included with many instance types, but if the instance moves between EC2 hosts, so if an instance is stopped and then started, or if an EC2 host has hardware problems, then that EC2 instance will be moved between hosts and any data on any instance store volumes will be lost. So that's everything that you needed to know in this demo lesson, and you're going to learn much more about EC2 and EBS in other lessons throughout the course. At this point though, thanks for watching and doing this demo. I hope it was useful, but go ahead, complete this video, and when you're ready, I'll look forward to you joining me in the next.